professional bass player. My name's Deborah and this is the video journal of my career transition, and that was a very simplified version of the bass line from Monsters Inc. So I'm here at jazz school at the end of the week, very tired, head full of knowledge, heart full of joy, I would say. It's a long week and there's so much information, but it's been really good, and it's the opportunity to play with a lot of other musicians and practice in a way that you wouldn't normally get. And it's in the lunch break now on the last day, and after the lunch break I'll play a gig with my band. There's a live concert, and each of the bands, there's 7 bands here this week, and we all choose a couple of the tunes and we play them to each other at the end of the week, having practiced them throughout the week. So in the mornings I've been taught by Terry Gregory, superb bass player and teacher. And in the afternoons I've been, and that's all of us bassists together, and in the afternoons I've been in a mixed band with lots of different instruments working on songs. And the 2 that we've chosen to do in our band are Monsters Inc. and another song called Ladybird. So I thought I'd just share with you some of the things. You feel a bit far away, so I'm just going to bring you down a bit. There we go. That's a bit better, a bit closer. I thought I'd share with you some of the things that I've come to understand about jazz. I'm on this course because jazz isn't usually what I play, and I know that there's a lot of musical information in jazz that is important to what I do. You know, jazz really informs pop, and I know that I'll be a better player for having come here and learned from the jazz school. So the first thing, you know that as a bass player, what I do is I play a lot by ear. I hear the bass line, I work it out on my bass guitar, I write it down in tab, and I learn it off by heart. So the first year I came here, I tried to learn the bass lines for jazz. I thought, I'll just do that, that's fine, I can memorize anything. It's not what you do. It's not what you do. So the first thing that really stood out for me is that as a bass player, I'm looking at the chords, not individual notes. And if you have a look here at Monsters Inc., you can see the chords going along the top of the sheet. So instead of a bass line, I play, let's do it really simply, E flat for a bar, followed by a C, followed by an F for a bar, followed by a B. And that is very, very simply the root note of that chord. And if you play that for that bar, you won't go wrong. It won't be very interesting, it'll be very, very simple, but that's your entry point. And it's okay to have an entry point, is what I'm learning, a really simple entry point. So you're playing the chords. So if we looked at that for Monsters Inc., that would look something like this. Let me make sure my volume's up. That's one note per bar. I could very simply do that and I would fit in with the other musicians. And that's like, ah. Oh. The next thing, so that's item 1 that I've learnt or understood as a novice to jazz. The next thing that I understood is that instead of verses and choruses and pre-choruses, and in jazz, they perhaps even perhaps a better system. They call it part A, part B, occasionally part C. And you've just got to remember that order. You play part A and then you play part B. Part B in Monsters Inc. is this part here. So that's part B, like a little bridge. So we've got lots of names for these bits in disco and pop, but in jazz it's just A or it's B, and that makes it very simple when you're all standing around in a group of musicians throwing bits to each other, and someone can just say, I'll take B or 2 times A, what have you. And another thing that was new to me was watching musicians do this. And that means head. And the head, which is usually part A, is the bit that sort of grounds the piece. We all know what it is, and it's really useful in jazz because if you get lost and everybody's like, where are we? Someone can take the lead and just go, 1, 2, 3, 4, head, and you all know which bar to go back to, where to go back to. So structure, that's first thing was chords and root notes, and the second thing was this structure to get my head around. So the third thing, and these are, appreciate, some of you that watch this aren't musicians, and some of you that watch this are beginner musicians, and some of you that watch this are advanced musicians. So for the advanced musicians, this will be really obvious, but this wasn't to me. So when you start, one of the simplest ways, so we've said that the simplest way to get involved is just to play the root note, but it gets a bit boring after a while. The second step, or the next step to make it just a little bit interesting, is to play a fifth. And you can either play a fifth above, which is the next string up and 2 frets along. So I'm playing the same bass line there. But a fifth above, or I can do a fifth below. And immediately that makes it bounce along and provides a bit more interest in Monsters Inc. So that's the third thing that I have learnt, is about, root and fifth. Very simple, and I want to keep it really simple today. There's so much information at jazz school, so many wonderful teachers, but I think for our purposes, let's keep it a bit simple here, a bit more straightforward. So the next thing is, once you've got this, it's still a bit kind of, at some point when they come to the solos, and during the solos, the rest of the band will play probably part A, but it might be part B, but it's more usually part A. And they will play it very, very simply, so that the saxophonist or the trumpet player, and then the keyboard player, and then the guitar player, and then eventually the bass and the drums all have a solo. And do you remember me telling you in the car on the way in the film earlier this week, that when it comes to the bass solo, I'd be like, and that's because the bass is holding down the groove. And then if you start putting all kind of, noodly notes in it, suddenly you lose the funk. Suddenly you lose the kind of the groove. And I took this to my tutor, Terry, and I said, because there's all sorts of reasons why you might choose different notes, and that's for a different episode of this. Maybe that's for next year's course when I go on that. But there's lots of different notes that you could choose that would sound really good. But every time I would do that, it would come to my solo and it would sound rubbish, because it just sounded like a load of harmonic notes that sort of went together, but it sort of lost the feel of the song. And Terry said something that we're not sure if it came from Victor Wooten, who's a good bassist to look up, or just from the collective unconscious there around the bass. I know that some of you will tell me in the comments below. But what Terry said was, don't throw away the groove when it comes to your solo, keep it. And we came up with this little phrase called improve the groove. So just improve the groove. So if your thing is... when it comes to your solo, you might go. Yeah, that wasn't very good. Let's have another go. And you can improve the groove, so stick with what you're doing. And my phrase for it is embroider it. Stick with the pattern, try something for a bit, and then move to something different. And under Improve the Groove, Tony Sanderman, who's the headmaster of the course here, he gave me a couple of tips. There's a couple of things around improving the groove. And I did actually want to say a word about Tony Sanderman. He's a lovely, lovely, lovely man. He and Mark Cecil have been running this course. All the tutors are lovely. And he reminds me a bit of Dumbledore, which might sound a bit rude. I don't mean it rudely. What I mean is he's very kind, he's very wise, and he's a little bit magic. He can play anything, and he just shows you lots of different magic things you can do. So one of the things he was saying to me, right, you can change what you're playing in several ways. And I need to experiment with this at home. But he's saying you can change the spacing, so you could just do... And you can leave space. That's something that takes much more confidence to do, you get given this solo, and when you first start doing it, you've got this collection of notes and you're thinking there must be a note on every beat, and the next stage of development is getting into understanding that there really doesn't have to be. And so leaving space. Then the other one was, Tony was telling me about, was thinking about play that same thing, you know where the octave is, it's there. So you can mess about with that. Then he was talking about you could play it near the neck end with your plucking hand. You could play it, you could palm mute it here. So all of these things provide variation. And I wish I could show you sophisticated things here to do with that, and that would be for somebody else's bass video tutorial, maybe a TED Talk bass. That's what I've got to practice. So I'm going to try and mess around with these parts and play them in different octaves, play them nearer to the fretboard, play them nearer to, I don't even know what this end is called, somebody tell me. This end, is it the stock? I don't know. Add space, take space, repeat a pattern a little bit, and then surprise people by changing it. That's what you're trying to do. So the last thing, and I might be on 5 things now, I've lost count, that's not good for a musician, is it? So the last thing I learned, or I've learned many things, but the last thing I'm going to cover here is triads. So fifths and thirds. So if you've got a C chord in jazz, and where's a C, or yeah, there's a C there, so I'm playing the C for that whole bar. You can't go far wrong in the chord of C if you play the first note, the third note, and the 5th note. And helpfully, in my book, Bass Tab Notebook, which is just for when I write out my tab, there's the cycle of fifths at the beginning. And my note to myself to read Miles Davis's autobiography. But here we are, here's all the fifths. And if we look at that C chord here, we can see that the 3rd note is the E, so we've missed out the 2nd, and the 5th note is the G. So if you find an E and a G when and remembering that the 5th is just 2 frets away and 1 string up, then you've already got a nice combination there that will work, and it's simple. So I would say that's what the overarching takeout from this week is: find the simplest way, and then when you feel relaxed and when you feel confident, take the next step and the next and the next. So for me, it's play the root, then root and 5th, then 1st, 3rd and 5th, 1, 3 and 5, then maybe add some space, then maybe play it in a different place on the neck, all of these things. And just as I get more comfortable and more confident, I'm sure all of that will start to come in. But one of the most important things has been to spend the week with my beloved bass. you know, I got into this. The only reason we're speaking is so that my bass and I could spend more time together. And sometimes it gets there's such a lot to organise with Divine Funk and Truly Red that calls on a lot of my marketing and management skills that old Basie and I, you know, we don't get as much of a chance to reconnect. So the nice thing has been I've learned so much more about the fretboard this week because I've just had to find things quickly. And my connection with my bass is stronger, and I think that can only be a good thing as I come up to playing our residency commencing at the Railway Hotel in Southend on the 25th of April, not long to go. Right, you have yourself a lovely weekend. I'll be back on Tuesday. You take care. Bye-bye.